I will say the people that were the most data-driven ended up succeeding the most at Uber.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. I'm your host, Nate Desmond, and today I'm thrilled to be sitting down with Sundar Swaminathan. Sundar is a growth marketing expert with over 13 years of experience, including at Uber, and is now a marketing data science and experimentation advisor to consumer tech startups. Sundar, welcome to the show. My first question for you is, at Uber, you helped with the magic trip metric, and you've written about this on your blog. I found it very interesting as a way to put data around an experience. Can you tell us a little bit about what is a magic trip and why did it work so well?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be super clear, I did not create the metric. I loved it and I wrote about it because I think it's one of the greatest uses of data around quantifying customer experience that I've seen. But at a high level, the magic trip was a very easy way to summarize whether a customer had a good experience or a bad experience. If you look at when a person decides to take an Uber trip, I think now we've gotten so used to it that it feels less magical. It feels sort of like everything should be perfect. But at the time, the idea of pushing a button, getting a car ride to show up to you, take you to your place, and never having to pay, never having to pull out the wallet, just having it all digital is pretty magical. But there are like 7, 8 steps in that journey that I think people sort of overlook, right? Everything from you decide where you want to go, then you order the trip, you have to wait for the driver to come, but you're seeing an estimated arrival time of the driver. Then the driver has to come, then you have to be picked up correctly, then you have an estimate of how long you think the journey is going to take. You then have that experience, and then you get dropped off. If you think about all of those steps, right, there's a lot of expectation management that is happening both on the information provided and in your own expectation as a customer. And so what Uber did was quantify what they believe the ideal magic trip for a customer should look like. When you open up the app, there should be so many drivers around you that the estimated time to connect with the driver should only be a few minutes. Then once that connection's been made, it should actually match what we told you was going to happen, right? It would suck if you thought you were going to wait 3 minutes and you ended up waiting 20. Then you take the trip, same thing. You've put in a drop-off location. For whatever reason, you might then be dropped off 200 feet from that drop-off location. That's a terrible experience. So we quantified all of these in terms of what we expected the magic experience to be. And then we looked at it and said, of all the trips we've had in a given week, month, how many of those would qualify as magic? And the beauty of it from a data perspective is you could truly isolate where in the journey that experience broke down and then go fix it. A really good example was I worked in Washington, D.C., and say around the D.C. arena, we had a terrible pickup drop-off experience. Well, you could start to either geofence it, you could ask people to walk to certain places so that they had a better pickup drop-off experience, right? All of this was in service of getting a better customer experience, but it's the best use of data around customer experience I've seen, and it's why I write about it, because I think more companies should put data around quantifying the customer experience, and then you can go fix it.
One of the pieces I think struck me most powerfully here is the way that this actually empowered people at all levels of the organization to be data-driven. And this is something you've talked a lot about in being data obsessed. I'm curious, do you feel like this magic trip is an essential part of bringing a data culture to the entire company, or does it fit within other pieces?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think I would flip it. I think it is another way in which Uber was data obsessed. It did not create data obsession. The culture of data obsession was there from day one, and it was there from the top, and it was part of the hiring process. It was part of, I'm not going to say compensation, at the end of the day, but I will say the people that were the most data-driven ended up succeeding the most at Uber. Right. And so you had Magic Trip as another way of just encapsulating this culture, this ethos of being data obsessed.
To what degree would you say this data obsession does come just from the founder and is essentially unchangeable in an established company? And to what degree do you think a established company or an early startup could actually build a data obsessed culture?
In my experience, and I only have a few companies like most people in the world, you don't get to go to 100 companies. I truly think it has to be founder led. And a lot of it is because data driven, data obsession, whatever you want to call it, what it results in is an egoless decision making.
Yeah.
And I think that, and so a lot of people, when they look at Uber's founder, Travis Kalanick, and again, I was not super close to him. I was there, 6 years after Uber started. And actually, a year after I was there, he was, replaced by Dara, if you will. I wasn't, again, that close to him, but like it was there from the beginning. And people think he had an ego. And I would argue, just by nature of the culture of Uber, he had the opposite. Like, I saw so many times decisions being made by the most junior people who just had really good data, really good evidence, a really good story to supersede a more senior person. And that level of, hey, a junior person can overrule me as a founder can only come from the top down. And I think that's where a lot of these larger companies struggle, is because they've got this structure system where it's top down decision making. And no matter how junior you are and how good your analysis is or data is, you can't necessarily cut through and push through because you hit some sort of roadblock. That, when I was there at Uber, did not exist, right? I saw, again, like I said, so many decisions that just were pushed through because it was good data. And again, good data just means they were willing to experiment with it. That didn't mean it would automatically be rolled out. And so that's where the founder-led culture has to come in, where you have to be willing to push back against even your first couple hires to say, well, where are you getting this from? What data is suggesting this? And then the bigger part too is the investments that you need to make in getting good quality data and having access to data. That also has to be founder led, where a founder has to have that conviction to say, listen, I'm going to get a data engineer early on. I'm going to invest in data scientists, data analysts. So to me, it's I think, like most culture, data obsession it's a type of culture, is always top down. I've never seen a bottoms up culture work.
And now a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation. When you talk about a junior marketer having a strong data-backed decision and overruling someone more senior, what does that actually look like tactically?
Yeah. So it's not, maybe not necessarily overrule as much as, that's I think what I mentioned, but as much as there's not going to be a pushback on, nope, this is not in my vision. It becomes let's try it out. And the best example was I was the head of US Canada performance marketing analytics. Must have been 2000, I don't even remember what years I was there, 2018, 2019. We were spending on Meta in the US, and I was responsible for that. I was also responsible for Uber's saturation analysis. So we had third-party data where we could look at how penetrated we were in our key markets, what opportunity size we had in the rest of the addressable market. And because I had that data, I also looked at our US Canada performance marketing results. And there's a part where we were spending the same amount, but our CACs were wildly swinging. And that only really happens when there's not a real great correlation between what you're spending and what you're bringing in, right? Otherwise, your CAC should be relatively consistent. Maybe they go up a couple percentage points here and there every year. Every month or every week. So I kind of took a look at this and I was like, wait, looking year over year seasonality, we're doing almost the exact same numbers, exact same pattern, even though we're spending very wildly different. Like, I think based on the analysis I'm also doing, like, we're pretty penetrated in the US. And from a performance marketing perspective, you start to connect these pieces and these dots to say, I don't think our marketing is effective. And so I propose that we completely shut off Facebook for a 3-month incrementality test.
Oh, wow.
We've proved it was non-incremental, and we just turned off a 35 million a year budget on Facebook. This is our biggest channel for performance marketing acquisition in the US, and we just turned it off. And there was not an ounce of resistance. I mean, there was hesitation, there was caution, right? Because it's a big decision, but everything from my manager to my boss to the CMO at the time, let's go try it out, right? If this is what the data is suggesting, let's go try it out, right? And so that gave me a lot of just like realization of how special a place that was, where I could do that at the time. I mean, it was only a year or two into marketing data science, but that's a great example of what that looks like tactically. Okay, cool. You've got the data. Let's go to experiment. Okay, the experiment says this. Let's do this. There's nowhere this arbitrary decision of like, yeah, we can't do that. And the last thing I'll add too is I know what it's like as a marketer to be concerned over budgets and giving back budgets and saying, well, if I give this back, I'm going to lose it. And that's the kind of stuff that I didn't see, right? Like you knew you could give it back, but you could go then redeploy it somewhere. You could go try maybe another channel. You could go experiment with Snapchat, Twitter were starting to come around a little bit more commonly then. So you could go experiment, and it wasn't the sense of, I'm going to lose my budget. It was, this is the right thing for the business.
It's incredible. So essentially you came in with a really strong story that said, hey, the CAC is swinging. That seems to mean we're not actually doing what we think we're doing. Can we turn off the entire thing for 3 months? Was there a easier way to experiment, or was that the simplest, smallest possible experiment to test this?
There's definitely ways to have done it a little smooth, like a little bit more gradual. But I think the analysis itself, it didn't like, there was no correlation, right? There was virtually no signal of when we have a bit more. And we also, I mean, I was blessed to work with some of the best marketing data scientists in the world. And so we had MMMs that we would, try to like correlate and validate this with. And, the data it was just there. And I think, in hindsight, I think it's, maybe you could have done a test where you reduce 50% of spend, but you would have you just get to the answer sooner, right? By going to these extremes, you go to, maybe 0% is too much, but maybe there's like 10%, 25%. But like, if you think about from just even like an economical sense, the test to go to 50 or say 75, then 50, then 25, then 0, you're still burning all of that budget.
A lot of cash. Yeah.
Versus if you go to 0, you have a very quick signal quicker. And so you can even then really turn it back on quicker and go back to maybe 100% or 50%. And so you kind of, I think, still in the long run are a bit more efficient.
Another piece that you've mentioned that ties into this is the value of simplicity that you talked about. Last click attribution being used for a lot longer at Uber than a lot of people might have guessed from the outside, and sort of how that is a fairly efficient way of operating, even though there are more sophisticated measures available. How would you think about that for a company that's maybe mid-stage, it's starting to get some traction? When should they move from simple last click to more sophisticated thinking?
We had a saying at Uber that I really liked, which is last click is wrong, but it's consistently wrong. And there's a beauty in that consistency, which kind of goes back to a bit of the simplicity, which is, and this was, I think also I'd like to caveat with, this is pre-iOS 14.5, which I think as a mobile business would have just wreaked havoc on us. And I know, Uber probably now has found better solutions for that. But at the time, it was fairly cut and dry. And the simplicity, again, with last click is that it might not be perfect, but it's consistently imperfect. And you can leverage that inconsistency. As long as if you're small, mid-size, you're probably only in 1 or 2 channels, right? And so you're likely in Meta and you're likely in Google, and that's about it. You've probably not explored these other channels. So with only 2 channels, last click is beautiful because the relationship between Google and Meta is, again, consistently understood, right? You're going to advertise on Meta, probably going to search for it on Google, and you can use that interplay as a way to understand the journey. The thing that I am really starting to become passionate about, and I'm excited because it's a new idea that I want to think about, is we need to move away from this term attribution to contribution. So last click attribution, all it's telling you is we think it's coming from this. This is where it's coming from. It's telling you nothing about what is actually contributing. And I wish more people would not assume attribution equals contribution, right? Like just because it says it's coming from somewhere, it doesn't mean that's actually contributing. And so even with last click, what you can do is still do incrementality tests on Meta and Google, for example. And what you're looking for there is don't worry about the attribution. Look at the overall contribution. How many signups did you generate per dollar? If that goes down or up, then you don't know exactly where it's coming from and you don't know where to shift, but you do know that your marketing has an effect and it's contributing to it. And this goes back to the simplicity of when you want to increase budgets, don't just double it with by holding Google constant and then double it on Meta. And that you've naturally built in a test, right? And you've naturally built in a mechanism that you can then go look at the data. And even if it's a pre versus post analysis, which is not super scientific, that's still okay when you've got a simple mid-sized business that only has one or two channels. You don't have to worry about the complexities of everything. So simplicity to me is a forcing function of making humans not overthink it. And that's the beauty and the simplicity for me is you're sort of really forced into the idea of how can I find the quickest amount of signal from the least amount of data? And you can only do that with something that's simple.
And it's interesting how often perfect can indeed get in the way of good, that you could have this amazing multi-thing, but actually simple will get you what you need and it'll do it much faster.
And if I could just add one more thing to that, I think there's a misconception that data science is designed to create perfection. By logic, it's statistics, which has inherent uncertainty into it. In fact, every statistician publishes things with confidence intervals, 95% margins of errors. Like the whole thing is designed around uncertainty, and it's actually trying to find uncertainty on, it's like less uncertainty on something uncertain. Like I could go into just the definition of confidence interval is misunderstood. But the point there is, I think the simplicity helps you be a little bit more uncertain with the uncertainty. This perfection thing, it's just a misconception. You can't be perfect with statistics and data science.
How do you think about building an experimental mindset? When you look at people on maybe your team or people that you're consulting with right now, how do you help them to grow in this thinking as an experimenter?
Yeah. It's the hardest transition because 80 to 90% of experiments fail. It's just a proven statistic out there. Every experimenter will tell you that, and by fail, it means that whatever you thought was going to work either had negative impact or no impact, or essentially it did not have the impact you anticipated, right? Yeah. What that means is you have to be in such a psychologically safe environment that allows you to fail 90% of the time and people still think that's a good thing. And that for a human is just that's a mind F, right? Like you're basically saying I could be really bad at my job 90% of the time, but that actually makes me good at my job. And that's actually kind of true with experimentation. And so what you're really like the cultural mindset, the help that you want to do is one, you need to transform the way they look at a loss or a failure and really convert it into this is a learning opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to examine what went wrong. It could have been we did not have the right customer insight going into it. We set up the experiment wrong. Maybe we analyzed it wrong, or maybe just flat out, it just didn't work. And instead of focusing on the result, you focus on the process, because every good experimentation company is really good at the process. They have zero guarantee on the results. Like every experimenter will tell you, I have no idea what's going to work or not from just pure experience. But what they do know is that the process that they're using to get results is going to work. And so that's a hard thing for people to absorb is, hey, you're coming in, you're probably an expensive consultant or advisor, and you're basically telling me you can't guarantee anything positive. And the answer is, yeah, that is absolutely true. What I am guaranteeing you is that you will have a better chance of finding success with this process than you will with whatever crazy thing that you're doing now. But it starts with you have to be okay with failure, and not only okay with it, you kind of need to love failure. And that's it's a pretty again, like a weird thing for people to grasp.
Yeah. I've heard in the venture capital space, there's a rule of thumb that you need to invest in something like 50 startups at least $10,000 each to expect to have one successful exit. Is there a
Yeah.
similar rule of thumb when you think about experimentation?
I think so again, if you go back to like 70-80% of experiments fail, it all depends on what you're trying to get out of the experimentation, right? If you're trying to hit a home run, I mean, you should be running 100 home run. I don't. So maybe to simply answer your question, I don't have the exact number. I do think like around 50 experiments at least is when you start to realize that there's meta analyses you can do, and there's kind of a pattern to what's working, what's not. But you have to remember that, if you want a 0.25% uplift in something, and all you're going to do is change like a text box and like a text color, it's not
Not
really
getting it.
like, you're not going to get it. Versus if you're like, listen, I'm going to run 100 home run experiments, knowing that 99% of them fail. But the one that hits, if that gets you double 200% growth, then massive, right? And a good example is Uber Eats. Um, Uber Eats was just an experiment, and a lot of people don't know it. It started with drivers would have prepackaged meals in their cars. People would order like a hot meal. It was only one of like two options, and the driver would go deliver that. But if you did not start with, let's go out with this crazy idea, you would not have created this new multi-billion dollar business. And every successful company, it can only last on its single product for a while. They all have multi-billion dollar side products, right? Google has multi-billion dollar products. Meta has multi-billion. Booking.com, right? All of these companies have multi-billion dollar companies. And a lot of it is because they threw enough stuff at the wall and one of them stuck. So to answer your question again, like 50, let's start with 50. Like if we can get companies to do 50 experiments, then good, because I think it means that they're willing to make the investment, they're willing to make that culture. And so the number is less important than just, can you even have the conviction to do 50 experiments?
Let's say someone listening to us right now is at a company that does not currently do experiments, and they're inspired by you and they want to start building a culture of experimentation. How do they ensure that some of the early experiments do show at least some degree of success so that they get buy-in to do more of it?
Yeah, that is the trap. If you go into it with, I'm going to try to find things that work, it's just not, because there's two things that happen, right? One, you go into it with this idea that the goal of it is to just find successful stuff, which is true in the long run, but it's not true in the short term. But you go into it setting this expectation that this idea that you've got is so good. And that's just not how experimentation works, right? You go into this with the idea that absolutely what's going to work, the customer. Well, if that's the case, then why even experiment on it? Why don't you just roll it out? Which then falls back into what everyone does is, yeah, I know what the customer wants, I'm just going to roll it out. And then there's just 1,000 companies out there that have thought they knew what the customer wanted and have failed. And so it's more important that to not go into it thinking you're going to succeed, but say, listen, this might not work, but here's what we're going to do. And so to answer your question, here's what I would do.
Yeah.
I would go, we're going to experiment on experimentation. I just want one clean experiment where we just test the pipes, see if we've got the right data, see if we can randomize users. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find after the fact, right? I'm running a test on 100 people. I'm going to then go do a sub-segment analysis after. I'm going to find the percentage of the population where this seemed to have worked. And then I've got a new idea. And you sell the process of, by running one experiment, I'm going to create 4 more. And it becomes this like Hydra-like thing where you cut off one head, you get 2, 3 more. And now all of a sudden you've got this laundry list of 300 experiments. And that's where you start to see some of the power. So what I would do for someone that's like, oh, I want to sell this, don't sell that you're going to find success. Sell listen, I've got one idea now. I don't know if it works, but I think coming out of this, I'm going to have 3 to 4 more ideas. And you kind of need to get a buy-in for like 6 months to a year of this idea. The thing that I will also add is I have this strong conviction for a lot of things that I've been lucky enough to experience. We don't need to prove experimentation works. First off, as humans, we've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years, and I think we're in a pretty good place with that. It's actually a natural thing for us to be curious and experiment. Two, we have enough tech companies out there, and not even tech, just companies out there that have experimented and have proven experimentation works. And it's how I feel about marketing. Like, we need to stop saying, well, does marketing work? No, your marketing might not work. Your brand marketing might be terrible. Your creatives might be terrible. But I've got 1,000 companies who have invested in marketing and invested in good marketing, who have created moats or have created evidence of all this. So it's the same thing. If you have to prove that experimentation works, you've kind of already lost. What you need to prove is, do we have the right culture to make experimentation work at our company? And not, does experimentation work? It does work. Get over it. How do you bring it into your own company?
Fair. How do you describe that end-to-end process? You mentioned companies that are good at experimentation, are good at the process. What does that look like to be good at the experimentation process?
I've got this actually, like this deck that I presented at a conference around how to build psychological safety and experimentation. And what it does is it breaks down experimentation into 7 steps. I don't have them all on top of my head right now, but basically you start with a customer insight, right? Our job as marketers, as product people, as just people building companies, is to solve customer problems, but they should be the ones telling us the problem. So it starts with that. So what they do is they're really good at customer insights. Then what they're really good at is making a bunch of hypotheses and prioritizing experiments. Then they're really good at running them. Like, they're really good on the scientific part and the art part of experiment design, of building really good experimentation. They've got the right data. They've got the right mindset. Then what they're really good at is analyzing it after the experiment is done. Did this experiment actually hit the target metric we wanted, objective? Yes or no? If not, then we don't roll it out. But then here's the additional analysis we've done. And what they're really good at is creating this cycle, this perpetual cycle of idea, experiment, analyze, idea, experiment, analyze. That's really what the experimentation cycle looks like.
And how does that look in terms of tools? Are there certain things that every person doing experimentation should use at their company and adopt to do this experimentation? Or can it vary widely from company to company and the tools don't matter so much?
Yeah, the tools don't matter so much. There are a couple that I have seen and have liked, only because I think they take a lot of the guesswork out. All the creativity and all the excitement happens outside of the tools. Because if you think about it from a tooling perspective, what you're doing is you need to have a list of users you want to target. You need to make sure those users are targeted correctly in like a treatment versus control, and then you need to be able to analyze it after. You can do all of that with SQL and Google Sheets, right? Especially on the analysis part. And I did that for years of my life. It was just Google Sheets. So it's never the tool. And I think it's a common thing that I hear. It's like, oh, if we had better tooling, we would be better. And one thing that I'll share is Uber, for at least the first, no, you know what? Throughout my entire career at Uber, for the 5 years I was there, SQL and Google Sheets were the only 2 tools I used. As a data scientist,
Wow.
like, knew a bit of R. A lot of data scientists know Python. Don't get me wrong. Like, a lot of people are using them, but I know with 100% certainty, Google Sheets and SQL are more than enough. Investment bankers, by the way, who are making multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisition deals, are just using Excel, and they've been using Excel for thousands, not thousands, obviously, but hundreds of years. That's enough for them. So you got to get over this idea that the tool is going to be the one that saves you.
Speaking of tools, granted, no tool save you. But speaking of tools, I heard Uber had a pretty special one called Query Builder, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
How did that work? And was it an input or an output of Uber's data obsessed culture?
That's a good one. It's a bit of both. So Query Builder, just for everyone listening, is nothing more than a web-based SQL interface. Like all it did was give you access to all of Uber's data. The thing that I loved about it, and that a lot of ex-Uber folks loved about it, is they had some like really lightweight dashboarding on it that was good, some really good visualization tools, which is really helpful for data that's spatio-temporal, or it's geo-based and time-based like Uber Rides. So it was really good with that. But what happened was you could run a query and it would create a new URL for that query. And that was awesome because I could go share that URL with anyone and be like, hey, like check out what this like query said, and I can go share it. And the reason that's so interesting is normally what you would have to do is you would have to share like the actual text, and you could share the data and like you upload it. But like you could just go send the query, and then people would tweak that query, run it for their own purposes. And all of a sudden you have this virality of a SQL query. And like, it's like, what? Like you never think of a SQL query going viral, but it did. They would go viral at Uber, right? Like I would see queries that I sent out to someone all of a sudden, like a month later, come back to me and be like, yo, you got to check out this query. And I'm like, this is why it's an input and an output, because it's an output because it started with someone saying, not someone, the founders and the leaders saying, we want everyone to give access. But then it became an input because everyone had access. And so it becomes this like really beautiful cycle. But even now, if you talk to ex-Uber folks and you just bring up Query Builder, like there is not a single other tool out there that gives people that much excitement just from like a SQL tool, like that people are super excited about. And you may have seen some other posts. It's the same thing with like Summary, which is a dashboard that we had that people were obsessed with, and just all these things that people at Uber were just so I can't find a better way. They were so obsessed with data that even like the tools for dashboards and queries, like they were excited about. Right? It was just a culture thing.
It's incredible. I'm curious how you see AI playing a role in this. Does AI, do you think, make it easier to run experiments at scale? Or is it just another tool that's not really that important to the bigger picture?
AI is such a unique thing that like I feel like you're going to either be completely wrong about it or completely right about it. And I like that. It's a fun guess. AI will make smart people smarter. It is not, in my mind, going to elevate everybody. And so what I mean by that is, as an analyst, like I think I was a really good analyst because I could make connections between multiple parts of the business, because I would go talk to multiple parts of the business. I would go to the operations team. I would go to the marketing team. I'd go to the product team. I'm like, what are you guys working on? Like, what are we up to? Like, what's exciting? Because when I would see my analysis, right, like going back to my story about the Facebook thing, if I didn't do the analysis on our saturation analysis, I wouldn't have been able to connect the dots on our penetration. AI is not helping solve that much, right? Like it's still a human connection emotion thing. It will make it easier for me to go, hey, can you pull XYZ for me, right? Then you can get AI involved in that. That makes it easier. But again, the problem with analysts and has never been the lack of tooling or tools to make their jobs easier. It's always been analysts are really not great at being business savvy. They don't really have strong business acumen. The average analyst is just not good at it. And a lot of it is because you've created these learn SQL in 2-day courses. And now all of a sudden people think that when they have this course and they publish that they've got the certificate on LinkedIn, they're all of a sudden this analyst. Well, you're in for a really like hard dose of reality. And so again, AI will make really good analysts even better. Like when you think of like a 10x engineer, I do think AI will create this idea of a 10x analyst, but the analyst has to have had the potential to be 10x at the beginning, just like the engineer. The engineer was born a 10x engineer, and then they found the path to become one. It's kind of the same thing with an analyst. Like you have to have this, you have to be super business savvy. You have to be super curious. You have to be just really strong at understanding how to play the game too. And so, something that I'm very passionate about is I am extroverted. I don't know if you can tell, but the classic analyst will describe themselves as not being. And I want to like encourage them to go away from that. Extroversion versus introversion is not an important quality as an analyst. Of course, it makes a bit easier in some ways, but it's investing your energy in the right things, and all of those things to be a better analyst. AI does not replace. So to me, AI, especially in the data analytics, data science field, it's not overblown. And now I realize one more thing. AI, as we're talking about it now, I think we're mainly talking about generative AI. Machine learning and AI have been around for 10 years at least 10, 15 years. So companies that have not even adopted that AI are in for a pretty rude awakening when they're like, let me try to adopt generative AI and all of a sudden fix attribution. Well, generative AI and attribution have nothing to do with each other, right? There's already been machine learning and AI for that for a while. So even then within AI, as we talk about it now, like I think there's a bit of an overhype because generative AI is not going to solve the meatier, bigger problems, at least in my belief.
Fair. I'm curious, your expertise is quite deep here, I think, because you have built a course at, I believe it's called The Art of Influencing for Data Leaders.
Yeah.
How would you, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I am a really good SQL analyst, but my leaders are telling me that they just don't feel like I'm influencing effectively, how would you help them to overcome that?
Yeah. So thank you for bringing up the course. Unfortunately, like I need to revisit that course. It never took off. And I've got a variety of hypotheses, but that's kind of part of experimentation, like just throwing it out there and seeing it sticks. So I am rebuilding a new course, by the way, more towards marketers, helping them prove the ROI of marketing, I think is what I'm going to call it. So it's a little bit more about helping marketers, but regardless. So going back to your question about data scientists, there are 4 steps in an analysis that most people don't realize, especially analysts, right? Prioritization, analysis, communication, and execution. And when an analyst is saying, hey, listen, I'm really good at SQL, my leaders are not, they're not viewing me how I want to be viewed, it's because you have a breakdown in one of those, right? Like, are you working on the highest priority things? Well, the only way to know what the highest priority things are to talk to your stakeholders. So, one of the things that in every team I've led, I would force the stakeholders and my analysts to be in a room once a week at the beginning of the week. I got really sick very quickly of people thinking that data science was a service function and that we were just there to pull queries. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. So if you want us to work with you, we're not working for you, we work with you. And we reestablish the relationship as partners, not support. That's what I would encourage an analyst to do, a data scientist to do, right? Create a partnership with that stakeholder. It helps you better prioritize. It helps also from like everything from promotions are easier. You get a little bit more like leeway when you mess up things if people like partner with you and trust you. Like, right, there's all these added benefits. It's a human relationship. The analysis, I would say, oftentimes what analysts will do is they'll go start an analysis and they'll just deep dive into it. And so what I encourage analysts to do is like write out what you're actually trying to answer first. Then it becomes a lot easier to go figure out the queries that you need to write. Then the communication, I would say, is the biggest part, right? It's almost like they've spent all this time analyzing. They've got all these insights. They're amazing. They're incredible. And then how they communicate, it just falls completely flat. I mean, I can't count the number of times where I've just been in a room and I'm like, I don't understand what this deck is. Like, what was I truly felt, I was like, you just wasted my time. And that is a huge thing that analysts, I think, often do is when your stakeholder feels like you've wasted their time, it really leaves a bad taste in their mouth. So the communication part is a lot of where the influencing happens. Just going back to my example, that Facebook analysis I did where we were like, hey, we should go test it. It was only 7 slides. Like it doesn't have to be complicated. It was just a crisp story, enough data. I worked with my manager and my manager's manager to make sure we addressed all of the questions. Communication and execution, right? The only way you get promoted is if you make impact. Well, you can only make impact if your recommendations get absorbed, if they get implemented, people like go take actions on them. And so you have to follow through the process, right? If you communicate an analysis, don't just leave it at that. Follow up a week later and be like, hey, like I did all this amazing work. Like, what happened with it? And they're like, yeah, actually we took it. This is what happened. We'll loop you on the email. Great. or they're like, I didn't follow up with it. Well, fine. The first time that happens, it's like, okay, cool. Second time that happens, I remember just being like, I'm not going to keep doing more stuff. Like, I'm not going to keep giving you all this work that I'm putting together if you're not going to go implement it. So like, if you want for me to do this, then we need, again, to find a better process. And maybe the prioritization is where I can help you with insights that help you with prioritization. So, you kind of just need to, yeah, just get better at influencing at every step of the journey.
$4 million saved per slide. That's a pretty good ratio.
It was a pretty good ratio. And I'll admit that I don't think I've ever been able to replicate that success per slide.
So I'm curious to go deeper in this pace area. If you look at it as an analyst, where would you recommend they allocate their time?
Yeah, let's just use, I think, a concrete example of you only need to spend like an hour a week max on prioritization. And then you've got an analyst, and I don't recommend spending more than 3 to 4 days on an analysis itself, because what happens is you just go down this rabbit hole of chasing things, and then your analysis ends up being like pretty complicated and messy, and then also stakeholders are waiting for an analysis, and now you're like, wait, I just need one more day, I need one more day. So in general, like, time box your analysis, so like 3-4 days, and then spend a day putting together the deck, right? Like, everything from go through the deck multiple times, rehearse it, get your manager's feedback. It doesn't have to be in one day, but my point is you should be spending like 8 hours on it, and go back and cut 50% of the words you originally wrote. And then the execution piece is just like another, like, kind of think of like prioritization as like another hour or two of just like, hey, like, what happened to the analysis? Did you guys do anything with it? So it's a little bit more of the networking sort of follow up. But if you in a 5-day week, that's how I'd break it down, right? It's still majority analysis, but the shift is most people don't spend any time on prioritization or execution and spend a lot less than they should on communication. So shifting the hours to a bit more communication, less time on an analysis, that in itself will have pretty promising results.
And if we were to flip that and look instead at the marketers who are working with analysts, how would you recommend they approach making the most of that relationship?
I think what marketers don't understand super well, or maybe are not aware of, is that an analyst needs a lot of context, especially marketing analytics. Like, if you're a marketer and you've done PPC your entire life, and you've done, and even a Google marketer versus a Facebook marketer, by the way, are very different, right? Like, they have different contexts. It's different dynamics. Well, you're expecting one analyst to know email, Facebook, Google, all of the channels, all of a sudden is really good at understanding geo testing, A/B testing, like 4 different methodologies. Like, they don't, and especially a junior analyst doesn't have that. So you have to sit with them and give them a bit of context on, like, hey, like, we made this decision on this day. We changed the pacing. We changed the creative. Here's what you might see. Oh, by the way, marketers might not know the product changes that were made, but the analyst has to go figure that themselves, right? So there's a lot of context. So work with prioritization with your analyst, like, tell them why you're prioritizing this. 2, spend a little bit more time than you think on the context, right? Like, it's okay to brain dump all the context, because more context is better than less context. Those are the 2 key things I would say. And don't ask an analyst to fudge the numbers. Like, it's a really, really, like, it's just shitty for an analyst, because you're put in a really crappy situation. And I honestly can't say that's happened a lot with at Uber, but there are times where they're like, can't we present this number? And I'd be like, no, it's my job on the line. It's my reputation, and I'm not doing it. So just don't put them in that situation. I think most marketers are above that, but it's something worth calling out.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, shifting to your current thing. You've been writing a newsletter, which is the reason I found out about you and was blown away by one of your latest postings. What got you into newsletter writing?
Yeah, so I've been writing consistently on LinkedIn for almost over a year and a half now. And the thing that, like, I've realized is I've had what feels like 5, 6 iterations of myself. At first, like I really wanted to write towards data analysts and data scientists. Then it was I wanted to write towards founders. Then I wanted to write more. Then I wanted to write about experimentation. And I never really like took a look at like what is my unique contribution to the world. And so my recent newsletter is about I've got this really unique position of I was at the US Treasury in this Office of Debt Management, responsible at the time for managing $19 trillion of debt. There are arguably 15 to 20 people in the entire world that have done some pretty cool perspective. I was at Uber 2016 to 2021. That in itself is not unique, but I was one of the first marketing analysts. And so I've got some really unique perspectives. I built out Uber's brand data science team responsible for measuring, optimizing, and help improve ROI of $1 billion in brand budget. Again, I've just had a series of like really lucky, unique opportunities. That's what got me into like the content on LinkedIn is awesome and I like it, but like I don't get to really go deep enough. And I don't get to like share all the cool stories and people I've worked with. And so I wanted to get into newsletter writing to help marketers and founders have better conversations around marketing works. Good marketing works. I've got ample amounts of evidence of that, but there isn't enough content around from data scientists trying to help marketers get better at that, right? There's marketers helping marketers, data scientists helping data scientists. But there's not a lot of cross-pollination of like, hey, marketer, like, if you want to get more budgets and better campaign performance and ROI, et cetera, you should understand how we think and speak because we want to help you get that. And so, yeah, that's kind of the inspiration is I finally feel like I've settled on my target audiences, founders and marketers of consumer businesses. Here's everything I learned being a data scientist at Uber. So that was sort of the inspiration.
And how have you gone about growing that newsletter and the LinkedIn side? I've seen you have like 6,000 LinkedIn followers. Your newsletter seems to be doing quite well. How have you approached growth of those channels?
I can't say I've done the hey, comment a lot, spend like an hour a day commenting on many people's posts. Like I haven't done that part. I haven't done collaborations. I just am trying to put out good content. And I think over time I've gotten slightly better at realizing what people like to read. Like people love reading about Uber. And so it's become a core focus of mine to share as much as I can about Uber. And so it really is just about a mix of trying to find like a recipe that works and then doing that consistently. And like I've got a newsletter and I still haven't gotten the structure around this that I want, but like most of my articles revolve around three things. They explain a concept, they show you how Uber did it, and then they talk about how you can do it for your own company, right? And so that's 4 posts, right? So instantly I can be like, hey, I dropped this newsletter. The week after I can talk about, hey, what is this concept? Go check out my newsletter. The week after that's here's how Uber did that concept. Go check it out. And then the 4th week, you've got another thing. So now you've got this like, pattern of things. And on Sunday, I drop a preview of what I'm going to drop. And so all of a sudden you've got 4, 5, 6 posts sort of naturally built for you. And that is it's just time. It's just consistency. Like it's just, you keep going at it. The hardest, the first 1,000 followers on LinkedIn were the hardest. The next 1,000 after that were slightly less hard. And the last 1,000 has just happened very quickly. So like, I'm realizing it's just a numbers game because, if you put out good content, more people see good content, they engage with it. And then all of a sudden you just get more eyeballs. So if you're early, I'm still early. I'm still very early. Like I'm comparing myself to people that have hundreds, thousands of followers and huge newsletters. And like, it's just consistency because, I briefly saw this on LinkedIn. Someone said, if you get to 4 podcast episode, you're longer than 90% of people. If you get to like 10, it's longer than 95. And if you get to 50, it's longer than 99. You just, without any indication of success it's just, if you get to 50 podcasts, you're in the top 1% of podcasters in the world. And it's kind of the same thing with LinkedIn, right? Only 1% of people on LinkedIn write content. Of that, how many start and then drop out. It's just, writing is something that I'm enjoying doing, and I'm finding it giving me a lot of like just enjoyment across multiple parts of my life. And so for me, it's just right.
And if someone looks at this and says, hey, I like the results that Sundar has, but I'm worried I don't have the time to do it. How much time does it take to do this sort of 4 cycle that you've built out on LinkedIn?
The 4 cycle that I still haven't implemented. I've done it before. The newsletter should take you at least 3, 4, 5 hours a week, right? And I'm not saying mine is good. I'm hoping mine is good, but this is how much time I put into it. But like, you need to find like ways to make it engaging. Or so everything from research across other blah blah, like other articles, memes. I try to put a lot of memes in mine just to make it fun. But like even just thinking through and then editing, like it takes about 3 to 4 hours a week at least. Then call it a hack, but you can get like a ChatGPT or an Anthropic to just summarize that in a structure that you provided. And then that'll take another like 1 to 2 hours. And so, it'll take you 5, 6 hours to get that 4-person system. But it's, I don't know if people think it's more or less, but I think 4 to 5 hours is probably a good estimate.
What is next for you?
Good question. I'm just going to like go spit through a bunch of things on my head. So, one, I want to continue with the newsletter for sure. I've got like a list of like 50 articles that I feel like I can write. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Where can people subscribe to your newsletter?
Yes. So you can definitely subscribe to my newsletter through my LinkedIn. Like it's a button that says like subscribe to my newsletter or view my blog or something like that. But I am on Beehive. The newsletter is called Experimental. And the idea being that experimentation is crazy. Like it's a crazy world, and consumer tech is crazy. And so that's where the mental and experimental comes from. But that's where you can find me. But yeah, so I definitely want to keep writing in the newsletter. I really enjoyed it, and the feedback has been so far great. And it's been really nice meeting people like you and people that have been, really supportive. I am currently an advisor, a marketing, data science, and experimentation advisor to consumer scale-ups. Consumer scale-ups it's a tough environment right now. And so I think I'm realizing I want to get back into full-time life. And so I'm starting to have those conversations. And so, any consumer company, ideally, in the Series B to C range, but if they're a little bit larger, that's fine too. Like that it has is wanting to build marketing data science. Like I would love to work at. And then the third thing is this course that I kind of briefly mentioned. I really want to get that going, and the course is going to be revolved around, how can I equip marketers to have more conversations that prove that the work they're doing is ROI positive, and just sort of giving them the tools to have those conversations so that because I know it's a big frustration for so many marketers.
That is wonderful. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes below, or wherever you're watching this. And before we wrap up, I have a final lightning round. This is a thing that I stole from another podcast, absolutely love, and try to finish all episodes with. I'll throw some short questions about the future of tech and marketing. Don't think too hard. Just give it your gut. Feel free to elaborate if you'd like, or leave it as a short answer. Cool. Customer retention or acquisition?
Retention.
Personalization or broad targeting?
Broad targeting. Brand
awareness or performance marketing?
Brand awareness.
A surprising choice for data-driven.
Yeah, so if I can just elaborate a little bit on that one, one, I don't think should be an either or. I think it's a mix of both. You can have performance marketing qualities in your awareness, and vice versa, right? You can do both, but in the long run, it's always an awareness play. It's an awareness at top of mind, mental recall play. And if you don't build that muscle early, I think it becomes very hard for people to do that. But that's why I'd say brand awareness.
Machine learning or rule-based algorithms?
Machine learning. In-house
analytics team or external consultants?
In-house. You can never get the context with an external analytics team. It's just, but on the flip side, what I'll say is I do encourage fractional/interim analytics leadership, but I think your core analysts themselves should be in-house.
That's an interesting concept. So the lead for the team would be fractional, but the people on the team would be permanent.
Yeah, because I mean, for the leader, like especially early on, if you're a smaller company, you don't need a full-time analytics leader. It's just overkill and too expensive. But you do need someone to mentor, prioritize, coach analysts, work with leadership. So I think there's a unique opportunity that hasn't taken off yet, but I'm hoping to see more of that.
That's an exciting concept. Cohort analysis or funnel analysis?
Cohort.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you, Nate. This is great. This is really fun. I'm glad we got to do this.